Good afternoon and welcome to this Distinguished Entrepreneurship Series event hosted by the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation here at the Booth School of Business and the University of Chicago. My name is Lucas Peralta and I'm an Associate Director at the Polsky Center, and I'm excited to introduce this event to you. Entrepreneurship is less an industry than a way of thinking about solving tough problems. This, of course, is well aligned with the University of Chicago's commitment to deep inquiry. As such, the entrepreneurial community is getting increasingly strong here at the University of Chicago. Entrepreneurship is now the biggest concentration at the Booth School of Business, and in the last 25 years, hundreds of companies have launched using university resources, like the award-winning New Venture Challenge, including Grubhub, Braintree, Simple Mills, Tavala, and many others. In just a moment, you will hear from an innovator whose experiences reflect the entrepreneurial way of thinking and problem solving. The mission of the Distinguished Entrepreneur Series is to advocate for innovative thinking across industries and fields of study. We hope it will inspire students, staff, faculty, and the Chicago community to reflect on big problems they experience and give them permission to solve them. Through prominent voices, we hope to expand perspectives on what defines entrepreneurship and innovation. Instrumental to the start of this series has been Chicago Booth alum and serial entrepreneur Manish Kothari. Manish has partnered with the Polsky Center to bring prominent innovators and entrepreneurial voices to this community, and we are so grateful for his support. In a minute, he will introduce our guest, Vallabh Bhanshali, but first, we have some housekeeping to mention. This event will be recorded and shared on the Polsky On Demand section of our website at polsky.uchicago.edu. Around halfway through the program, we will open the conversation to audience questions. You can submit a question using the Zoom Q&A tool. I will be reviewing and moderating the questions. With that said, I'd love to introduce and welcome Manish Kothari to introduce our distinguished guests. Manish?
Thank you, Lucas, and thank you, Dean Rajan, for hosting this conversation. I'm honored to introduce our guest, Vallabh Bhanshali. As is common practice in India, when referring to someone who's like an older brother or is an older brother, I will add the word bhai when referring to him, to his first name. We first met almost 40 years ago through my cousin, who is a good friend of Vallabh Bhai's. Vallabh Bhai's journey has been remarkable in that he is a very successful entrepreneur, and over the years, he has advised and worked directly with some of the finest entrepreneurs in India. His journey began as a chartered accountant, and after which he was a research analyst. Soon after that, he co-founded ENAM Securities, which over time became one of India's leading investment banks. While at ENAM, he worked with the founding teams at Reliance, at Infosys, Vedanta, and many more entrepreneurial companies. And in 2010, ENAM merged its advisory business with Axis Bank. Since the merger, he has spent most of his time, he's devoted a lot of his time to social, educational, and spiritual endeavors. Through his nonprofit Desh Apnayan, the nonprofit is teaching children civics engagement and the importance of civics. He has helped establish two pioneering and leading higher ed institutions in India, including FLAME, a liberal arts university, and the Indian School of Public Policy. He has served on numerous boards, including the board of the Reserve Bank of India. With characteristic humility, he credits a lot of his success to the practice of Vipassana meditation. He has also been the chairman of the Global Vipassana Foundation. On a personal note, he has been a wonderful mentor to my brother and myself, and several years ago nudged me into practicing Vipassana, for which I am deeply grateful. Please join me in welcoming Vallabh Bhai and Dean Rajan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manish. And thank you, Vallabh, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. It's really a pleasure.
It's my pleasure and honor to be with you. Thank you, Manish, for very, very kind words. and giving me this opportunity. I must say that I feel a little overwhelmed as I have moved away from active business. But to get this opportunity to reflect and put certain things in perspective, I have myself got excited about the opportunity.
Thank you. Maybe we can go through some of the journey that Manish talked about. Perhaps you could start by talking about the early founding of Inarm. What was the impetus behind doing it? What problem were you trying to solve, or what were you trying to achieve with that founding?
So, well, like others, most young people, you want to build a career to begin with. And so NM was probably a function of a few things, some boldness, a lot of play of destiny, some value system, and passion. So I was a high-ranking chartered accountant, lawyer, and I was in an accounting practice, but I wasn't an accountant at heart. And I gave up my flourishing practice to go into wilderness. And I found love for equity research as my calling, and the rest is history. Then I met my partner, a genius in his own right, and we had common value system. So we brought research, that was our strength. Then, as destiny would have it, it turned out to be right place at the right time. And India started opening in 85, we opened doors in 84, and we never looked back. The whole research, passion, commitment to values, commitment to delivery set us apart. And it was rather easy for us to establish our position in the market. And then 91, when India started economic liberalization more seriously, we had some great opportunity of working with companies like Infosys. And the challenge that Infosys faced, or young companies faced at that point of time, that India was a feudal society. The business was also conducted in a feudal manner. And therefore, when this whole professional class started to emerge, they did not always get the best spokesperson. And so we provided, because of our research understanding, we provided early insights into, as to their potential. So it was a very heady situation for us that, we could work with these entrepreneurs. They loved us, we loved them. And so this is how destiny played. And some of them faced great difficulties. I remember whether it was Infosys or Harsh Mariwala's legendary company Marico, or Anil Agarwal, who now runs one of the largest metals empire in the world, how difficult it was for him to break into the feudal world, licensing world that we had in that period. So also to establish a capital market agency that was focused on knowledge, on being a friend of the regulator, being a friend of, be the great counterparty, so to speak. And this was very important. Let me just put this in perspective, that when a country like India, which was under suppression and slavery for hundreds of years, and had licensing the socialistic way of governance and economy, when it opens up suddenly, most people don't know what to expect. And we were kind of coerced into, opening up in a certain manner because we are in a financial difficulty. And therefore, a firm like ours, a company like Infosys, they were kind of a windfall for our economy and the country, that we could establish that what freedoms could do. And so Mr. Murthy is a legend at Infosys, of course. For the first 10 years, he kind of wrote all the regulation that, you have to have audited results, you have to have half-yearly results, quarterly results, analyst meets. I held the first 6 analyst meets in the country. And therefore, setting some of these pathways for economic liberalization, some of the milestones and landmarks, I think was a great experience for us. And I think looking at over the last 30 years and maybe the next 30 years, India is, place of destiny for the world. And it boils down to freedoms. Freedoms which will be provided by policymakers and wiser regulators.
Mhm.
And over the last 30 years, we have seen that. We have had some slowdowns from time to time, but this was the journey that ENAM was able to, walk with the country until 2010, when we decided to merge our business.
Which we'll talk about in just a bit. Just to go back, so you founded Inarm, and then a few years later, the whole liberalization happened. Is that something you had sort of thought might happen, that the country might go through this big opening, or was that just happenstance, if you will?
We were not doing that well, and therefore, in the 80s, we had a huge crisis in the late 60s, and we had again runaway inflation in 70s. So, as the Indians started to migrate to America in the late 60s, and knowledge started to come back, and people started to look at India. And therefore, when we got a young prime minister like Rajiv Gandhi in 1985, that was soon after we started, the prospects were there, but there was no definitiveness about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then 91 happened.
Mm-hmm.
But so in between the period of 84 and 91, we could see that the enterprise had started to blossom. It was 40 years since independence. And that independence had started to have some color as the government loosened its controls. We had that emergency and so on. Mm-hmm. So how politics and economics, they impact each other. So I was a witness to that. Mm-hmm. So we did see that this will happen, but with what speed, to what extent, clearly we did not know. But we were not materially constrained. We benefited immensely, but we were doing well even otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Maybe for the audience who are not that familiar with India, you could explain sort of what was so significant about what happened in 91. I think that might be useful.
I think so. So India was a closed economy, socialistic economy. And therefore, if you wanted to import anything, you wanted to set up a business, you required government permission called licensing. So much so that if I wanted to raise capital, we had an office called Controller of Capital Issues, which office told you how much money to raise, at what price to raise. And it was crazy. How could a regulator tell you what the market should be paying? So you could be underpricing, you could be overpricing, and therefore we didn't have freedoms. The capital markets, used to open for 2 hours, and you can imagine. So we didn't have any developed forex markets or bond markets. They were very, very small. In 91, because of this poor economic management, country ran out of foreign exchange reserves. We had only 15 days worth of foreign exchange to meet our import liability. India has a huge oil shortage, and it continues to, a large extent. And we were in a precarious situation. But the culture of the country came in handy. That it has a great mercantile culture, one of honoring one's commitments, etc. So we pledged our gold to get some loan from the World Bank. And it hurt our pride deeply. So we said, we must do something, get back our gold, and come out of this misery. And that's when it was easier to let go of all the controls. We also got a visionary Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, at that point of time, and a capable lieutenant in Dr. Manmohan Singh, who had worked at the World Bank. And because of this, as they say, there's nothing like a crisis to teach you and make you progress. That was the kind of crisis. So suddenly Indians could import their technology, the capital markets opened up, and then the Indians never looked back. So a lot of people in America wanted to look at India, particularly in the technology field. The other thing that happened, which was fortuitous for India, is that India had developed engineering education quite well. And as software was developing, it was a windfall for India. So I think software industry has played a big role in India's progress and stabilization. So today we have about $200 billion of exports and growing at 15-20%, including services like ITS and now SaaS. And so this combination of factors pushed India's feudal thinking. It took 10 years. When we opened up the economic reforms to put this in perspective, some of the industrial houses came together to fight the reforms, that this is going to take India down and so on and so forth. But the promise of the youngsters in India was so large that fortunately they did not succeed. And the determination of then Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, he did not yield to those pressures, but they were extraordinary pressures. So after 5-6 years of reforms, there was a lot more familiarization. And once we had a new government under Mr. Vajpayee, we had some political uncertainty. Under Mr. Vajpayee, reforms consolidated considerably. So those who have seen India in 90s and then in 2010s, they were very different countries. And it is a matter of combination of some leadership and also some fortuitous circumstances.
So you mentioned that in 2010, you merged ENAM with Axis Bank. What was the motivation behind that? How did that process kind of take place?
So it was a combination of factors, as is usually the case, that because Indian markets had expanded dramatically, business had started to thrive. We had a lot of foreign investment banks come in. Looking at our success, that most of our peers, they had foreign partnerships. We were a standalone firm and we established an Indian identity. So other Indian firms had also started to come in, but they had a different approach. They started bringing capital, private equity firms. And we saw that I was very passionate about running a knowledge-driven, relationship-driven investment bank, as classic investment banks are, and not use capital. When the business started, becoming more capital intense, balance sheet intense, I lost interest in it. I had also a sense of fulfillment that I'd done it for more than 25 years. We had done some of the greatest stories in the capital market. And I thought that it was time to do more things in life, which I was very passionate about. And then we looked for someone who would enable me to give a continuity to my franchise, continuity to my people, and yet create value for both sides. So there weren't many people, so we were lucky to find a willing partner in Axis Bank. And then we merged it. We had challenges there too, because it was a kind of novelty that a prominent commercial bank taking over an investment bank. And that was largely a franchise. We didn't have a large assets or balance sheet. And so the transaction took a long time to consummate. And it tested the quality of franchise, the quality of commitment that we had made to each other. Fortunately, we both came out with flying colors. It has turned out to be a very good asset for them. And the holding that we got in Axis Bank has also done quite reasonably well. I think it'll do much better in future. And the team really thrived and flourished under Axis Bank also. So it was a challenge for my skill as a deal maker. That when I made a deal for myself and it went into difficulty, we all were very stressed about it. But I think the value system and the stars helped us through.
So you gave a great description of sort of India 91 and the changes that happened since. And over the last 35 years or so, with all the changes that have gone on, how do you feel the reforms have turned out? And what would you tell the audience they should know about India's economy and business environment, just given that you've been through all of it?
Sure. So many people know, but not all, that how India was one of the most prosperous countries in the world. And it was a prosperous country in the world, not because of resources, but because of its extraordinary mercantile culture, its civilization. But due to historical factors, India went down considerably, was robbed of trillions of dollars, and it lost its confidence in itself, confidence in its culture. And so that is a different topic. To emerge out of it, it took time. So many times when it announced some reforms, some people got too optimistic. And then for the first 10, 15 years, there were a lot of accidents that people came to India and they said, no, it is tons. For example, every single foreign telecom company that came to India, except Singtel, made an exit from India. Several insurance companies, automobile companies, some of the other services companies, engineering companies, they came to India and they were surprised. They were rather, unpleasantly surprised by the slow progress, etc. But I think now that I understand India much better, we had too many holes to fill. Over the last 30 years or so, a lot of those holes have got filled. For example, in 92, we had this huge stock exchange crisis. So we had a crisis in the stock exchange, we had a crisis in the bond market, the government treasury market. And we had a huge setback. So while the perpetrators had a role to play, but even the regulators were caught asleep. They didn't have the skills. As suddenly we opened up markets, expanded, and people did funny things, the regulators had no idea. Over the last 30 years, both Reserve Bank of India and SEBI now have established themselves as top-rated regulators in the world. So from regulation to the quality of policy making, the quality of entrepreneurs, the auditors, the law firms, all of them have come a long, long way. And some of them are, setting the benchmark in the world. Some particularly are technology companies, and joining them are our pharma companies. Now the innovation in pharma companies, that India is one of the very, very few countries that was able to develop vaccines in record time. And of course, the whole vaccination program, talking about the capability that the government service infrastructure, has developed. Right. Two things I would like to mention as to how India has changed. One is, I think, amongst the best social sectors that I see, come out. I'll give you an example. India, of course, had, being a tropical country, a lot of incidents of tropical diseases, and we needed vaccination. So we had high child mortality, and we still are the disease capital of the world, which I think will change over time. And one of the dreaded diseases was polio. And we needed to vaccinate the whole country. In an illiterate country with poor infrastructure, doing that was very difficult. And how the social sector came together, worked with the government. Maybe we took 10 years more than we had planned, but we eliminated polio. And today, the same kind of success has happened in vaccinating, over 2 billion people, 2 billion doses of COVID vaccine. So the social sector is going to play a very important role. And, maybe we have an occasion to talk about my own intervention in social field. A very different social entity that has come into India is called iSpirit. iSpirit is, made of people, many of them or majority of them had worked in America and globally. And they wanted to do something for India. And they said, if we can do something which is world-class in terms of technology, much cheaper so that it is relevant to India and hugely scalable, they will have solved not only India's problems, but they will become solutions for a lot of countries in the world and maybe even emerging, maybe even the developed world. Out of this table, we have produced, of course, the world famous now, our whole identity platform called Aadhaar, and how in the shortest possible period, at unbelievably low cost, we were able to create an identity like a social security number in US and other countries. This is probably at 5% of the cost that some of the developed countries were able to create similar infrastructure. We created a payment infrastructure, which is absolutely top class. It is recognized by every central bank that if it is payment tech, you have to go to India for setting the standard. We have created several other things. So for example, this whole vaccination has a very interesting story, that how one bureaucrat gave some money, research support to a company which developed another vaccine for rotavirus. And the same company was able to develop a COVID vaccine in due course of time. So I think that this combination of technocrats who want to give back to the country is a very unique asset. I'm a part of that organization, and there are many initiatives that I cannot talk about. But I think this social sector, these technocrats coming back and giving to India, and stable policy, which is never reversed. It has slowed down from time to time, never reversed. India's unique geopolitics, etc., have created a very different country, one which will play a big role in the affairs of the world.
So a lot of the people listening are people who are entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs. What advice would you give to them about, if they wanted to start something in India?
A couple of things. Number one, India is not one country. It's a continental country. We have so many different regional differences, cultural differences. North India is very different from South India and so on. So be ready for it. Secondly, you need to customize and you need to localize your management. Companies that came to India and localized their management fast, they really did very well. Companies like Unilever, Citibank are very fine examples. One has to understand the cultural nuance of the country, the spending habits. And one company which did extremely well in this was Maruti, the big auto company, which is a Japanese joint venture and the government of India joint venture. Government has now moved out over the last 15, 20 years. But how they've held on to 50% of the market, as all kinds of every automaker in the world came to India, is in India or exited, but Ford, General Motors, all the European companies. Amongst the foreign companies that understood some of these principles, companies like Hyundai and Toyota have also done extremely well. So I think some of these factors are very important. You need to be patient in India because of some of the things that I said, that it's a difficult country with a lot of variety, and spending power has grown in jumps and spurts. And therefore, if you're not patient and you don't hit that one of those sweet waves, you may exit too early. So those companies that are focused on the customer in their cultural need, in their economic needs, buying pattern, etc., and made patient investments have done very well in a number of countries. The Koreans particularly, several Japanese companies have done very well. So I think one other positive thing that a global entrepreneur can probably hope to get is high quality talent. I think both technical and managerial. Some of our lawyers, accountants are absolutely world-class. And it takes time to build relationships. If you do all of these things, India is a place which will give extremely attractive returns and will create talent pool. For example, the global companies that I talked about, whether Unilever and the Citibanks, they have taken back so many of Indian managers to manage bigger affairs. MasterCard and some of them are well known, having Indian CEOs who worked in India once upon a time and then came on to lead global companies.
Maruti was Suzuki, right? Back in the day, Suzuki was sort of the original partner. They've been super successful. So just speaking a little bit more about your journey, maybe you could speak about joining the board of the RBI and what that opportunity was like for you.
So, well, I really don't know how that happens because I just got invitation from the government that will you be a director, and I thought about it. And I said, this was at a time when India was coming out of its difficulties post the global financial crisis in 2008. And so I saw there was a chance to contribute to it. I would say that Reserve Bank of India is one of the finest institutions in the country, very, very professional. I learned a lot. That relationship is very confidential and therefore I cannot talk much about it. But I think it's very happy to see the way the bank has changed. They had a policy of not allowing new banks to come. I think Mr. Dr. Raghuram Rajan, when he was the governor, he pushed very hard for bringing about that reform and allowing a lot more banks to come. And now, of course, the Reserve Bank has moved on dramatically and done a great job. So I was a witness to a lot of that. I think I made my little contribution, but I can't talk much about it.
Okay. You spoke about after the merger with of ENAM with a larger bank and moving on to more of your social and educational efforts. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that. What what drove you to those particular things as the areas that you wanted to focus on, and how has that journey been for you?
I've been a great believer in, giving back. I felt extremely contented and grateful even when I had just 2% of the wealth that I may be having today. And therefore, I was teaching while at school. I started teaching, one of our 3 goals when ENAM started was create an equity culture. And so I taught a very, very popular course at the Bombay Stock Exchange Training Institute. And therefore, this has always been a part of us. 15 years ago, we saw that a lot of Indian kids came to America and other countries, America largely, for the liberal education. So we set up a liberal arts university. It was a pioneering effort, and today it is one of the best. Similarly, public policy, and our Indian Institute of Public Policy is very close to UChicago, yes. And some of the founders and management are, ex-Booth and UChicago. There again, idea is that India is going to need leaders by the dozen. So both the institutions, FLAME and ISPP, are focused on creating leadership. I have a few other initiatives. One is on value education. So one of the NGOs I'm very closely involved in, we created the largest value education program probably in the world. And focused on government schools because 75% of the kids in primary schools are in government schools. And if we can teach them values. Similarly, we have one initiative of active citizenship that I feel that democracy has not evolved the way one had hoped. For the people, of the people, by the people, many times is just a theoretical concept. And we've seen some of the big democracy. US had its own hiccup, a few years ago, and we have not done enough. So it's an organization that is trying to work with the young across the schools. And it's just a long haul, but it is doing well. The last initiative I would like to mention is one about livelihood. That if you can solve the livelihood problem for the poor in the rural India, largely farmers, you can solve everything. Once you have some money, all the value of education and health and environment and everything. And I think so we are getting some very early results from that initiative. So idea is that all the spiritual wealth of India is just now starting to become relevant. As we get confidence in our own wisdom, own capabilities, and given the fact that one thing that needed attention, and it has happened over the last 15 years, that bottom of the pyramid is no more a matter of slogans, that we need to do something. Something seriously has been done, particularly in the last 6, 7, 8 years. And because of that, the ability to engage with them and bring about faster results is happening. And therefore, all these education efforts, the livelihood efforts, and value education efforts, etc., are showing a lot of promise. So it's extremely satisfying. And I could go on because there are other initiatives, but country needs it. I think all our privileges, and now that we have 2 flourishing institutions in ISPP and FLAME, we have a lot of knowledge and capability to reach out to create what I think will become a force multiplier in 5-10 years' time.
So for the audience, I think our alum Luis Miranda has been involved with the public policy as well. And so, yeah. So Manish mentioned, and you talked about the Vipassana meditation. Can you talk about how that has had an impact on your life, and how does that influence the sorts of decisions that you have made through your life?
Vipassana is, I think, one of the most powerful revolutions going around the world, a very silent one. The meditation requires silence, is just a pun, but country after country is doing it. CEOs like Jack Dorsey are very devoted. The great scholar, Dr. Yuval Harari, is a practitioner of Vipassana who will take anywhere from 30 to 60 days a year to practice Vipassana. Vipassana means the ability to see the reality as it is, not by convention, not by bias, etc., etc. Once you do that, what go out is this overpowering sense of greed and fear. And that's what actually clouds our decision, our perspective, our aspirations. So you are hugely liberated as you notice greed and fear in you coming up, and therefore your decision making becomes better, you become compassionate because you feel so fulfilled that it's something that you have to experience. Vipassana is a purely experiential, form, experiential path. As you experience this, the sense of fairness that you have in your dealings is not a matter of imposition. You naturally become fair and compassionate. And therefore your relationships change dramatically. So you're quieter, happier, you're more capable at your work, you enjoy your relationship much better, you can hold them much better. So there are all round benefits. And so from school children to jail inmates, to politicians, to doctors, all kinds of people, all our centers in the world, 200 centers of them, where we teach Vipassana free, are always overfull. Courses get booked in 5 minutes of opening in so many of the countries. So it's a wonderful thing. I can't recommend it more to each and everyone. I call it the best competitive advantage you'll give to yourself if you learn to know yourself as you really are and deal with others in the same manner.
And maybe if we could bring that back to the entrepreneurship as well, how would you feel like an entrepreneur should think about their values and how the values should influence the kinds of actions and decisions that they take?
I think is the deepest relationship. In Vipassana meditation, we learn that it is the orientation of the mind that will decide the future. And take, for example, what has happened to Twitter. As soon as Elon Musk said that, I want to take control of the company, several things happened. Not only in terms of stock price, but as to what to expect, how the other countries in the world are. And that's all comes from the value system that people associated with Mr. Musk. I have seen company after company, take for example, Infosys. Infosys wanted to build a great reputation. The objective they set for themselves that we want to be the most reputed or amongst the most reputed companies, not a large company, not a prosperous company, etc. And they said our reputation will be based on certain things. Now, because of that, in 2001, when we had the tech bubble, Infosys stock corrected massively. But they were able to come back beautifully. They became the first company that could win the trust of investors in America and get listed on NASDAQ. That enabled them to win value-added customers. That enabled them, when Sarbanes-Oxley happened, they were amongst the very first few companies to file that we have nothing to declare. And that has enabled them that they had a bit of a succession issue in between when the company stumbled, but they came back. So they built delivery engines, customer relationship engines, which has lasted them in a very tough business. So these were middle-class people who set up this company and it served them. And they set examples for the whole country. Another example I can give you is one of HDFC group of companies, Housing Development Finance, set up by Mr. H.D. Parekh, and then his nephew Deepak Parekh has been at the head. This one company created a value system. We are low profile, but we are ambitious. We do not want to leap. We want to provide a certain value proposition to our employees and our customers. And because of this clearly well laid down value system, from the housing finance company to the housing HDFC Bank to HDFC insurance companies to HDFC AMC, each of these companies has become a leader, and they created huge market capitalization for the shareholders and a great working place for their employees and their customers. So that's another company that I can think of. I can think of, say, Birlas. Birlas are probably 8th or 9th generation entrepreneurs in the country. And so particularly one branch of Birlas, and I worked with 3 generations of them. And they say that, look, we don't have to be too smart, that we will not get into cutting edge technology. But if we build great relationship with our senior executives, that if we follow financial discipline and don't get carried away by too much ambition, megalomania, etc., we will be around for a long time. So they're a great lesson of business values, and that has enabled them to be in the 9th generation of business leadership. So I think example after example, I had the misfortune also of helping companies that went kaput. Some of them became scandals. So I learned that if you don't take your business seriously, if you do not value financial discipline, you will definitely get into trouble. So we saw particularly in the 80s and the 90s that people still had the rent-seeking mindset, that you don't want to create value for your customer, and then how you get into trouble. And then they personally lost out, their companies lost out. So I think this sense of fairness, sense of sharing of wealth with employees, sharing of your capability with your customers, and ever-changing, and of course being honest. And so I have another platform, Dean Rajan, which is the Truth Foundation. And its objective is this, that people don't recognize truth as the most practical, successful formula. A truthful society is easily a more prosperous society, a happier society. So we are now propagating truth as the most practical success formula rather than an ethical value or a legal requirement. And so the companies that have practiced this, how that transparency, etc., have done extremely well. And one example could be, I mentioned Marico earlier. Harsh Mariwala is just an ordinary commerce graduate. His family was in commodity business, but he wanted to build a branded business. In India, before he came, every branded business belonged to MNCs. All consumer goods companies were dominated by MNCs. He adopted transparency as a cornerstone of his strategy and meritocracy. With those two principles, he has been able to build a multi-billion-dollar, truly blue-blooded MNC in consumer goods business. So I think values have everything to do with your long-term success and the quality of business that you will build.
Thank you. Lucas, I know we have a lot of questions that have come in. Do you want to get some of them?
Sure,
sure, absolutely. Let's start doing some of the audience questions. Give me 1 second and I will pull them up. All right, so I've got a question here from Nikhil Malpani, who's interested in India's economy. He says, what would be the path for India to double its GDP in 5 years to meet Prime Minister Modi's target? What work has to happen for that growth to occur?
I think 5 years may be too ambitious, but I think it's a North Star that he has set. And I think we need to deregulate even faster. We need to create more ease of doing business, which is happening in some manner. We have had 2 accidents in terms of COVID years, which affected our growth, and we need to get out of this war situation. Otherwise, I think India is well positioned to grow rapidly for the next 30 years. I think we will grow at 6, 7, 8% for a long period of time, and maybe become a $20-25 trillion economy by 2050. And there's a combination of factors that's already working. Say, for example, a first-rate startup culture, the government's decision to come out of several businesses. So one of the toughest decisions was to get rid of Air India, something which the governments were trying for 15 years, but this government was able to get rid of that asset. The investment that is going into infrastructure at an unprecedented scale. One other thing that has happened, which will enable this faster growth, is that the first time probably since independence, that all the 3 balance sheets, one of the government, of the banks, and of the large enterprises, are all healthy. Once that happens, our ability to invest in the economy is completely different. And the CAPEX cycle is kicking in. So I would say that a lot of positive factors are combining at this point of time. If not 5 years, I think it's 6, 7 years, we shall definitely double our.
Great. We have another question here from Luis Miranda. What has been your top 2 or 3 deals during your ENAM days? What deals are you proud of, and what do you feel defined your legacy there?
So, all the deals that we did for Reliance Industries, some of them were in very, very tough environment, and we did breakthrough deals for them. One, of course, for Infosys, where, we opened the issue and it ran into very bad weather, and we still weathered the storm and did it. One of the proudest deals was probably one of Air Deccan. It was a low-cost carrier, the first of its kind. It had built a lot of expectation. But when we opened the issue that very day, some political event happens and the market crashed. It crashed to an extent that it went into circuit filter, trading stopped. Now it could be more terrible. But even in those very, very adverse circumstances, we salvaged the IPO, we took the company public, and that carrier survived. It was the leading carrier of its time, and that enabled the whole sector to come up. So I think it was a very pioneering deal in the whole aviation sector. Today, it's a very, very thriving sector. So these are 3-4 deals that I would like to mention.
Thank you. Okay, we have actually an anonymous question. What are the 3 main characteristics, or you can do a different number if you want, of successful entrepreneurs? What makes an entrepreneur successful?
I think focus on customer and value system. And of course, the commitment to, fulfill whatever you set out to do and that you promise to others particularly. So it may take longer period. It may happen in different ways. But if you have this value system and commitment, I think you will deliver. So I think value system is something that I think is absolutely central. And that includes hard work.
Very cool. Let's see. We're getting a lot of questions about book recommendations, and you're sitting behind behind you is a whole bookshelf of books. Do you have any recommendation for books, particularly for entrepreneurs?
So one is about your whole personal hygiene, and that is your mental hygiene. I talked about Vipassana. So I would say Art of Living by Bill Hartman. And another book is The Eponymous Mind by Manish Gupta, senior McKinsey partner. William Hartman is an American patents lawyer, and he is this. So that's something about your own, how you deal with yourself. That's very important. Understanding of money, what is called Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Though it's an investment book, but it has lessons about entrepreneurship and business which are unmatched and extraordinary. On entrepreneurship itself, I think reading all the biographies of great entrepreneurs, and America is full of them. Every country, a lot of books have come out, and they're rather well known. So Snowball, which is on Warren Buffett's life, I think is particularly extraordinary, because that's one entrepreneur who represents 100 enterprises all in one go. So without taking too much time, I will stop there.
Great. Let's see. Looking back at your career, how would you compare the past 10 years in the nonprofit space to the earlier 25 years in working for ENAM? Like, how would you compare those two?
I would say both have been very exciting. I have been busier in my last 10 years than I was probably even at the peak of my career. And the challenges that I faced in the last 10 years have been very, much greater than what I faced in my professional career. But they've been very, very satisfying. And therefore, when we work with the poor people, downtrodden people, when we try and change mindset in social areas, in spiritual areas, I talked about our experiments with, spreading truthfulness. I think those challenges are much greater than, our effort to build an equity culture in India or getting people to become mutual fund investors and so on. So they're very different, challenges. But I would say I am finding my last 10 years even more fulfilling than the very lucky ones that I spent in the previous 25.
Very interesting. Who would you describe as some of your mentors?
So one is, of course, Mr. Narayana Murthy of Infosys. Second was my spiritual master, Acharya Goenka, who was my Vipassana Acharya, Vipassana teacher. Then I would say I learned a lot from the Ambani family. The late Dhirubhai Ambani and then Mukesh Ambani. They were extraordinary minds. Dhirubhai, for the simplicity of his thought, that India is such a large country, you don't worry about consumption, you just produce, and how he expanded the whole mindset for the country in terms of thinking scale. Mukesh Ambani, for the thoroughness of his approach. He is able to think 20, 25 years ahead. All these people have had a great influence on me. And of course, my father, who represented true enlightenment for me. And that is maybe a personal journey, but I'll just give one aspect of his life. Last 30 years of his life, he used to visit public hospitals every day in an anonymous manner and serve the poorest of the poor by going bed to bed and giving them whatever they wanted, from writing a postcard, running an errand, to giving a whole hospital ward uplift to the hospital, and how selfless, tireless, up to age 91, the last 30 years of your life did that. He had a great influence on me and mentored me a lot.
It's incredible. Follow-up question is, a lot of young business people, young entrepreneurs are actively seeking out and cultivating mentors. Do you have any advice on how they can pursue that?
So, mentor is someone you have to relate to. And today there are mentorship platforms, there are teachers and alumni, networks. And so you have to try few of them. There are, of course, these business coaches and all, which has now become established professions, which didn't exist 15 years ago, probably. And so, from university professors to ex-business executives, books have been written. And I continue to receive, mentorship requests even now. So people reach out, somehow they find out, who has made a difference, and people reach. But you have to make a connect with your mentor. That is very important. So it may not happen first time you try and reach out to someone. But they come in all kinds of forms. They could be, some family member, it could be a friend, and it could be some of these formal coaches and mentors. But I would highly recommend that it is great to look for an active mentor who can be a bouncing board, a sounding board. It's great to have one.
Thank you for that advice. We have an interesting question here, particularly given your role as having founded two institutions of higher education. What do you see the value of international education for Indian students who intend to return to India? Is it still worth it? Is there value there? What are your thoughts?
I think it depends upon the student, his ability to really get something out of it. Not every kid I found that goes to a foreign university gets optimum. You have to go to a good institute, you have to work very hard, and you have to really look for what is different there. It's fortunate that Indian universities are changing extremely fast. A lot of them have global tie-ups, they have exchange programs, and because of the internet, you are able to get a lot of knowledge sitting at home also. But if you go to a foreign university, a top-class foreign university, which particularly has research programs, and you get a chance to work on some of those research programs, and you are making the best use of the facilities, the knowledge systems available in a top university, I think foreign education still has a lot to offer. Provided, as I said, you go to the right institutions and you have the right attitude. An average student going to an average institution, I don't think adds a lot of value.
Thank you. In running a business or an entrepreneurial venture, how do you think about balancing your values and the interests and needs of the venture?
So actually they have to align. If your value system is correct, and if you're not practical, then it's not value system, you're just being a stranger. if you're too hard and you don't understand that compromise is the way of life, then something is wrong. So, for example, a good capitalist is a generous person. You cannot be a selfish person. Similarly, your values cannot be eccentric values. They have to be inclusive values. And therefore, if you think of values in that sense, you generally will find that people will appreciate your values. Of course, you cannot agree with everyone and vice versa. So leaving those situations out, by and large, whether it is the investors or whether it is customers, you will generally find that good value system has takers all around you.
Here's another interesting question about India's economy. What sectors do you think are ready for growth and we should keep an eye on?
So clearly services are a very, very big field. As the bottom of the pyramid is coming up, you need to have cheaper values. So from all the health, education, travel, all of them are a large market. And there are companies who are repackaging their products and services to reach out to them. On a longer term basis, on the next 15, 20 years, virtually every business has potential in India, because you're going to see rolling nature of opportunity come up, that some of the old companies die because they can't keep up. For example, in banks, we saw a lot of the old banks just gave way to very enterprising private sector banks. And so also insurance. We had this dominant insurance government companies, but today they are some 60%, or 40% market share has come to the insurance companies. So aviation, travel, real estate, virtually every field, if you have the right approach and patience, has a lot of potential in India. It's just the beginning, as our per capita income will go from $3,000 to $8,000 over the next 20, 25 years. Oh, you can sell anything.
Thank you. There's so many interesting questions here. I think we have time for one last one. You've talked about spirituality a lot. How important is spirituality for entrepreneurs, for young MBA graduates, and how should they think about it?
Spirituality is always important. Spirit is something what lies at your core. In a world which is changing very fast, which is extremely distracting, your ability to remain centered is more important than ever before. And that's why you see a lot of mental disease, proliferating at a very, fearful rate. And therefore, learning a spiritual practice at an early age will enable you to have a sense of proportion, that nobody knows the future. The best decisions in most people's lives are accidents. So you get too obsessed with, what you can do and what you got and what you missed out. You get that sanity not to take too seriously. So understanding spirituality means understanding your connection with the universe, who you are. And those just 2-3 fundamental questions, when you have clarity about your ability to navigate more peacefully without stress, multiplies tremendously. So I think it's always valuable. In today's times, extremely valuable.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here today, Vallabh. The Polsky Center is incredibly grateful that you took the time to speak about your experiences and speak about your advice, particularly to this audience that we have here at the University of Chicago. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I'm sure Manish has some closing remarks as well, but I just wanted to say personally, thank you. It was incredible.
Thank you very much, Lucas. Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Vallabh, I just want to echo that on behalf of the university, and really thank you. This is, as usual and not surprisingly, very insightful and thoughtful. And I'm sure that the audience will learn a lot. And thank you again for your time, especially at this late hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
And thank you, Dean Rajan, as well.
Thanks, Lucas. Bye, Manish.
Thank you, Dean Rajan. Thank you,
Thanks,
Lucas.
everyone.